North Canton Mayor David Held
Yes. How are you?
fine, yourself?
Doing good.
Made comments tonight about a pretty tough EPA letter that was sent out by the EPA, Joe Kelly, June 13th. Had a list, as you pointed out in your comments, of 9 areas that Maple Street Commerce has to deal with to get the Hoover complex in some kind of shape. I couldn't really tell from the report what the future is. There was talk in the report about information that the EPA had that Maple Street Commerce wants to tear parts of it down. And so what's your take on the future of what remains of the Hoover complex in light of the EPA letter?
Yeah, I think it was, we had a conference call with the US EPA, and they had the project manager and the community relations representative, and then also one of the managers for the RCRA. It's the Restoration and Conservation Act. And so the good news is that there's 9 deficiencies in the US EPA work plan that they have to comply with. There's also fire and building codes that they've got to comply with.
Right, and we're talking things like PCBs and TCE, which is...
Yeah, can you hear okay? You want to move? You want?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay.
So that, I mean, VOCs, that's
Yes.
pretty soil gas contamination, BEHP,
Yes.
which is in fact capped, and there's restrictions, and of course EPA is talking about perhaps the need to cap the ball fields that Maple Street Commerce transferred to North Canton City Schools back in March of 2011. That's pretty concerning material, isn't it?
When you look at the Hoover district, it's an old industrial site, and so when you have an old industrial site, you have a brownfield, or which really what it is when you have an industrial site, you have contaminants in the soil. So there's a lot of chemicals, there's oils and different industrial liquids that had seeped into the ground. So you have contaminated soils, and really the 2 major areas are the groundwater, making sure that the groundwater is not contaminating the drinking water supply. So what they do is the US EPA requires that there's multiple monitoring wells that are dug into the ground in various locations so that they can manage the plume or the area of contaminated soils. At the same time, they also want to manage the vapors, any potential vapors that are being given off in that area where there's contaminated soils. And so they have certain standards that you have to meet. So if you have a commercial operation, the standards are a little bit less than if you had a residential suites.
Yeah, in fact, Kelly says where we go with this depends on what Maple Street Commerce's development plans are.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And a part of it is residential, which is the higher standard that you're talking about.
That's right.
So is the residential part of the plan, from your perspective, in jeopardy?
No, they're still able to do that. Again, it really comes down to 3 areas. The US EPA requirements, the environmental requirements, and if they meet those requirements, which is depressurizing the concrete slabs, making sure that the vapors that are coming out from the ground are collected, and similar to a radon system. If your home, if you have it tested and there's radon gas in the basement, usually if you sell your house, you'll have a test that's done, or people will proactively do a radon test. And if there's one that is, if there's higher than acceptable levels, then they set up a system and they evacuate those fumes out of the house. There's no harm to
and I understand all that, and it's doable.
Right.
But question comes, and I know you're not an insider with Maple Street Commerce,
Right.
but is the money there This is not cheap stuff.
Yeah, I think the finances are a different question, you know, and you know, their commitment to investing in that particular site. That's something that they're, you know, going to have to resolve as they move ahead. You know, what we do know is that that site is still perfectly acceptable as far as developing from a commercial standpoint and a residential standpoint.
And it can be done, but question is there money to do it?
Well, you know, do they have the financial wherewithal, and do they have the willingness, you know, to proceed with that? And that's something that, you know, I expect that they do, because they've already invested up to $12 million in that particular site. So I do not think that they're...
And this is above and beyond the state of Ohio grant, right?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a total of $17 million then?
Right. And see, what my perspective is on this is that whenever you have development, when you look at IRG, their business model, it's pretty clear that they do a lot of redevelopment of old industrial sites, and they utilize government or public funds, whether it's in the form of grants or historical preservation tax credits, you know, CIC money, which is Community Improvement Corporation funds, sales tax, income tax, property tax. There's a number of different sources of public financing that you can use for a project. In North Canton, the big source of public financing for the success of the first phase was the Job Ready Sites grant. That was granted by Governor Ted Strickland when he first came into office, so they gave the city of North Canton this project a $5 million Job Ready Sites grant. There was also historical preservation tax credits. So the state and the federal government, I don't have the exact amount.
You have a rough idea?
It's in the tens of millions,
Okay.
you know, combined.
Okay.
And so what happens is the federal government and the state government will offer tax credits, and then a developer will be able to sell those tax credits, and for like 85 cents on the dollar. And
that went to Maple Street Commerce?
And then that money goes to the development of the project. But you have to redevelop the project with preserving the historical nature of the building. Okay. So there were historical preservation tax credits that were used for the smokestack. That had to be repaired. And so I think that what causes a lot of the delays is the public financing. And that's something that, you know, we get, you know, we'd like to see it move a lot quicker than what it is right now.
Public finance, but actually now it's private finance.
When I say public financing, I mean, you know, whether it's through property taxes, income tax, sales tax, state grants, historical preservation tax credits, it's still a source of public funding. And so oftentimes that gets delayed or doesn't move along.
Has Maple Street asked for some additional money?
Yes, they've made it clear that they would like to see the property tax abatement, which would be, you know, we call it the CRA, which basically the CRA is a mechanism that when you have the property tax, like let's say that the property tax that they were normally paying on a particular site was $100,000, and then with all the improvements that they make, the property value goes up, let's say, you know, 20 times. So now the property tax goes from $100,000 up to $2 million. And so what you can do with like tax increment financing, you'll hear those terms, right, you know, or like a CRA, you could say, all right, for the increase in the property taxes going from 100,000 up to 2 million, we will take 50% of that, or we'll take 100% of that, and when that tax is collected, we will forgive that and say that you don't have to pay that for the next 3 to 5 years, 7 years, 10 years.
So that's what Maple Street's asked for?
So what they're looking for is they'd like to have a property tax abatement for the second phase of the Hoover district, and obviously they'd like to have a 100% property tax abatement. Right now, the city of North Canton took our CRA and we rescinded that ordinance. And we have interest in exploring bringing that back. But if we were to do that, and if it were to be completed for the Hoover district, we'd have to, number one, find out what portions of the project would be eligible for a property tax abatement, and then also, the willingness of the city and the council.
So it's just not it's not available right now.
No, it's not available.
Were any other sources of public revenue that Maple Street asked for?
No, that's been the only one, in the past couple of years.
Okay.
Is the property tax.
Okay, well, to go back and use your terms, financing seems to be a question. Willingness seems to be a question. What if the financing and the willingness isn't there? What happens to the rest of the project?
Yeah, well, I think that from the city's perspective, there's really not going to be any change in the respect that, that portion of the building of the Hoover district has been vacant since the Hoover Company left back in 2007. So from the city's perspective, we do not have any money that's invested. There are no existing loans against this development project. So financially, we're in a very strong spot. What our primary concern is whether or not the project moves ahead and at what time frame. That's obviously got to be determined by IRG. But we know that whether they move ahead 6 months from now, a year from now to bring this project to completion, we know there's three things. That even if the building, that portion remains vacant, they have to meet the US EPA requirements, the fire code requirements, and the building requirements. Those are non-negotiable.
Those are North Canton ordinances.
Canton.
They have to comply. How are they coming with that?
They're working with us on that, which is a good thing. They don't have any of them in place. They don't have any of them finalized right now. But we made it real clear in a very clear letter to them that the building code and the fire code has to be met. That's the city's.
How much time are you going to give them?
We had given them 30 days, and obviously they're not complete. But some of those items typically would take longer than 30 days to actually bring them to completion. And so, but then recently we did receive the letter from the US EPA, and it's our job to make sure that the residents are safe,
right,
and that the people that are working at the Hoover district are safe and they're able to work there.
But how about the local codes? I've been asking
the
you that.
local codes, that's important. They've got to be met. Even if the project does not, even if the second phase does not move forward, the building code and the fire codes, they've got to be met.
Is there an outside limit? How much time are they going to get?
Well, I'm pretty confident that they're going to move along with this. Otherwise, we, have to go to the next step, which is, file in court, which we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that they, comply, and because we want to make sure that the people are safe. If there's ever a fire that breaks out over there, even though it's vacant, that all the fire and building codes are met. It's a non-negotiable, and we've got to get that done really quickly.
Okay, so if the willingness isn't there and the financing isn't there, is there a
well, then that's a
scenario that maybe what has been a landmark in North Canton for I don't know how long, Hoover, this building's been over here, many years, that it will fall to demolition?
No, I don't see that happening. Some people have asked me that because really the building still has value. Again, you have to keep in mind that the developer, IRG, has invested 12 to, I'm not exactly sure on the exact figure, but it's anywhere from $12 to $20 million already into that project. And so, to walk away from that, I do not see that would be something that the developer is inclined to do because there is value.
Well,
there's a lot of value in that facility. And then when you're looking at the the amount of money that would have to be invested to bring that up to the fire code, building code, and meet the environmental regulations. I mean, we're talking a whole, probably in the tens or hundreds of thousands, but not in the millions, which is what they've already invested. So that's where I'm confident that they're going to proceed at some point with the EPA requirements, building code, and fire code. I mean, they will have to do that. That's not a negotiable. And then as far as the development of the property, that's something that I'm confident that they'll move ahead with, because they already have a significant, they have millions of dollars already invested in the project right now.
Which is so, but when you're talking about a company like IRG and its principal, Stu Lichter, when you're talking 12 million or whatever, to him, that's not really that much money.
Right. I mean, yeah, because he's got projects that are a lot bigger than that, but still $12 million is $12 million. And so, I don't think that there's
so you don't see any scenario where he's going to walk away from it and North Canton's got a problem on its hands.
No, I mean, that's not going to happen. That's going to be, again, the codes are going to be met. The building codes will be met, the fire codes will be met.
From someone that it's pretty certain that the Schroyer Group's going to leave some 300 jobs. Do you agree with that, or you think there's still room to keep them here?
We'd love to keep them here. The Schroyer Group, I talked with their president, Jerry Schroyer. The Schroyer family has owned that business for years. They've developed it into a multi-million-dollar company. And I have a very good relationship with Jerry Schroyer, and we are really grateful that he has all of his employees working here in the city. He did tell me that he was looking outside of the city because he had issues in reference to his lease, and he wanted to make sure that...
and the lease is with Maple Street Commerce, right?
He had concerns that, requirements that he had in the agreement with IRG were not being satisfied to a level that he found acceptable. And so he said that he was looking at another location outside the city, and he was also looking at, the possibility of owning his own building. And so we are really grateful that Jerry Schroyer and his company have been in the city. They've been a great asset for us. We'd hate to see him leave, but we understand that he has to make the best possible business decision for his company and for the family business. So if anything changes, if the plans change, Jerry had, he's a very open and honest business owner, and he's been great to work with. He said that he would continue to keep the lines of communication open, and if anything changes, then we'd certainly be ready and willing to do whatever we can to keep the business in North Canton.
If things don't change, when do you expect the switch to take place?
Yeah, I don't know the exact date, but it would be sometime, I believe, within the next 2 years.
Okay.
And so, again,
it's not going to happen this year, then, probably.
No, I don't believe that that's the case.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I think we're looking more like towards 2019, if I recall correctly. But, the good thing is that when we lost the Hoover Company, our income tax back 18 years ago, any guess what our income tax was back 18 years ago? Was $7 million. When the Hoover Company left and we had the recession, it dropped from $7 million down to $5.4 million in 2010. So it was a 23% reduction. It was devastating to North Canton, because our largest employer, the Hoover Company, left. Then we got the second whammy with the economic downturn, with the depression. But what we did is, we became much more cost efficient and effective. We had 116 employees, and as people retired or took other jobs outside the city, most of them were due to retirements. We brought the workforce down to 91, and we were still able to provide the same service that people had become accustomed to. So this is not new to us. We have an incredible ability to endure changes. Our tax base is much stronger now, because before we were solely dependent over at the Hoover District on one company, which was at least at one point, I think it was 40 or close to 50% of the city's income tax when you look back in previous decades. But now, if a company leaves, of course it's terrible when any company leaves. We want our companies, businesses, our goal is to retain jobs and bring new jobs in. When you look at the Schreier Group, we want them to stay. We will do everything that we can to keep them here in the city. In the event that they decide to relocate the business, then what we'll do, and by the way, the owner, Jerry Schreier, had assured me that he was very satisfied with the city services, the cooperation that he has from the administration and from the city council.
His focus was on the landlord.
Yeah, and also, just looking at what is going to, be the best business model as he's moving forward, with the business. So, but on a positive note, North Canton's tax base is more diversified than it's ever been. Because right now at the Hoover District, even though we lost, our income tax went from $7 million down to $5.4 million. $7 million in the year 2001, dropped to $5.4 million in 2010. Now we're back up to over $8 million, which is good. And we have, at the Hoover District, instead of one company, now we have 12 new companies and 1,100 new jobs. The income tax from the Hoover District is $500,000. It's not close to the million plus that we had when the Hoover District was here. I think it was probably even close to $2 million in some cases in years previous. But we're satisfied with it. We're stronger. We're more resilient as a city. And now we're not just looking, over the next year or next 2 years. We're looking over the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. So what we like to do is look at where we need to be, and that's where our direction, that's where our decision making is going. And that's the long range planning that we're getting into now as we're looking at the Safety Service Center for our police, fire, and EMS. That's something that has been put off for years, but it's because we just didn't have the revenue, we didn't have the resources. We were just trying to keep our heads, just slightly above water, just to function and provide the services. And now that we're more solid, that's where we have to look at the next 10, 15, and 20 years as far as where we want to be with our safety services and also our service department. So that's why we're moving ahead with the safety levy.
Okay. Just to wrap up then, in view of the building code non-compliance so far, fire code non-compliance so far, and the EPA non-compliance so far, it really sets things back in terms of when there will be some kind of definition as to where this project's going to end up. I know when you ran for mayor last year, I think you were figuring another year or two or so and it would be wrapped up, but that's all out the window now, huh?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, when you have these non-compliance issues, it delays the project. There's no doubt about it. When you look at the first phase, we were really pleased with it. The first phase, and the first phase was done over a number of years. So when you look at economic development, it does take years to develop. And again, what complicates development is when the project requires public finance. Whether it's through grants or whether it's through property tax abatements, income tax, sales tax, there's tax increment financing. There's all different tools that a community can use. And in our case, it's really the two areas that we've used the most, the two greatest economic development tools has been the income tax, what we call an occupancy grant. So we'll collect the 1.5% income tax, and we'll say to a company, based on the number of employees that you have, we will collect all the income tax, and once we collect it, we will give you up to 50% back. But you have to use that income tax money that we've collected and we're going to give back. Usually we do 50% for up to 50% of the length of the lease or 3 to 5 years. And so we collect the income tax and then we give that money back to them in the form of a grant. But they have to spend that money on their facility and on their business in North Canton. They can't take that money and spend it on another branch outside the city. So it helps them to redevelop their business that's located in the city. And then the other area that has been helpful, aside from the property or the income tax, what we call the occupancy grant, is the property tax abatements. The community reinvestment area. So we say to businesses, if you come in and you're going to remodel or redevelop the Hoover district or build a new business, then we will take a portion. The city has the authority to abate up to 50% of the property tax. Now the school would have to do the other 50%. Now what gets a little bit complicated are the schools typically are the largest. Well, not typically, they're always the largest recipient of property taxes, roughly 70%. And the city collects approximately 10%. But still, the law gives 50% of the authority for property tax abatements to the city and the other 50% to the schools. So that's where we try to work with the schools and make sure that, we're able to meet their future needs. But we do look at, I certainly look at it, and I think a number of the council members look at as the giving.
So that problem's been solved. Of course, there was a breakdown in that cooperation between North Canton and the schools on the North Ridge Place CRA abatement. So,
and that was a problem. That, when you look at the North Ridge apartments, that was a problem because which really was the cities, the administration, which I'm responsible for. That would have been that was our responsibility, and it's because the language in the ordinance was not very clear as far as what is a residential property tax abatement and what is a commercial property tax abatement. So when you have an apartment complex, it's a residential apartment complex, so it could be interpreted that indeed was eligible for a residential property tax abatement, which is indeed what was given to them by our economic development director at that time, based on how the ordinance was written.
Yeah.
And that decision is solely the economic development director's decision because
but that problem's been solved now.
But right, and the reason it didn't go before council or the school board is because the law by the state of Ohio says that, oh no, we're not going to have city council or the school board weighing in on a residential property tax abatement. We are going to give that authority exclusively to the economic development director or the person assigned to that.
Right.
And so it was given to them, and it was a large chunk of money. I think it was, up to like $60,000 a year. So it was in the, hundreds of thousands of dollars over a 14-year period. But we were able to get with the developer, Bill Lemon and Bob Dehoff, and I felt badly about it because they did nothing wrong. They were following the acceptable ordinances and rules, and at the same time, the schools were upset over that, and so Bob Dehoff, I really am very appreciative to Bob Dehoff and Bill Lemon because they were willing to cooperate with us, and they actually made sure that the schools were given a large percentage of their property taxes back. And you don't find a lot of developers that would be willing to do that. And that's where they've been great partners for North Canton.
Of course, Stu Lichter is the master development under Hall of Fame Village LLC, partnership with the Professional Football Hall of Fame. I think if you officials in North Canton could have seen down the road that he was going to be heavily engaged in the Hall of Fame Village project, which, if it gets completed, will be probably over $1 billion. probably would have thought twice about having Stu Liquor come into North Canton and redevelop the Hoover complex.
So the question is,
The point of the question is that that's really a much bigger project, takes a lot of time, and wittingly or unwittingly, projects like North Canton just are not going to carry quite the clout by quite a bit.
We're a much smaller project.
Right, so where I'm heading with this is that if you had known that in advance, that was going to happen, a little different decision as to who you'd had come in and help you salvage the Hoover complex?
Yeah, no, I don't, that wouldn't have changed my decision at all.
Wouldn't it?
No, because really, when you look at the first phase of the Hoover District, it has been an incredible success. An incredible success. But I think one of the driving forces is that we did have a $5 million Job Ready Sites grant, which was a major source of the funding for the first phase. And so a lot of the financing was in place, at the start of the project. And then when you look at a larger project like the Pro Football Hall of Fame, there's a lot of moving parts. There's, when you're talking about $1 billion project, I mean, that's a very, very impressive project with a lot of entities that are involved. And so, we can understand that, developers have, various priorities just like we do in the city of North Canton. And we're confident that...
is North Canton suffering because his priority is the Hall of Fame and not the... finishing up the Hoover project?
I mean, that would be something that he would have to answer. I mean, a lot of people...
Well, what's your
felt that
perception?
way. I would say that, they got a lot on their plate with the Hall of Fame. Clearly, they've got strict timelines. When you have the incredible operation of the Enshrinement Festival, the Pro Football Hall of Fame Enshrinement Festival, every year. So they've got really strict deadlines that they have to meet. Here on this project, we don't have those same annual strict deadlines for them to meet. So if this project, was delayed for a year, 2 years, 3 years, which it has, we don't like it. But at the same time, there's no loss to the city. It's not like we have outstanding loans or debts or it's not creating a problem for the city in that respect. It is disappointing and it decreases our expectation a little bit. You start to become a little bit more when they say, hey, we're going to get this done. They're like, well, okay, we'd like to see some action. And so, again, when you look at their ability, IRG has incredible ability to bring a lot of success to a community because we've seen it.
But IRG's had some problems across the nation too.
Yeah, absolutely. We can see the problems and the delays in the Hoover District project, which I have not been quiet about that.
No, you haven't.
But the good news is that if they meet the requirements, we can move ahead with the project. I look at myself as somebody who's very realistic and also at the same time optimistic. I think when I first started as mayor, my optimism clearly exceeded my realism. And I think now, after being in public service, this is my 18th year, you learn to balance that realism with the optimism. And the realism is that the building code, the fire code, and the EPA regulations, those are non-negotiable. Those are going to be met one way or another. The optimism is that we still have a viable second phase at the Hoover District, and this can be completed, and we're looking forward to it. So I'm confident because they've already invested, at least $12 to $20 million in the second phase. I'm very confident that they're not going to just leave that sit, that there is truly an incentive for them to bring that project to completion to at least some level.
And you're not closing the door on the possibility of more public support for the project?
Well, when you look at public support,
I'm talking about, like you talked about the CRA,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, that you're not just saying, no way, we'll talk about it.
Oh, absolutely. Everything, we're willing to negotiate in order to bring success to the project. That's what we all want. Ultimately, what the residents and the people in North Canton want is they want that project across the street to be developed. That's what we want. But at the same time, first things first. EPA regulations, building code, fire code, those are non-negotiables. Whether the project moves ahead this year or not, those requirements are going to be met.
And you've had that kind of a conversation with Stu Lichter face to face, right?
Yes. And also Patrick DiOrio. Now, I haven't talked with Stu Lichter for a number of months. It was actually dating back to last August in 2017, because we've made it clear that, what we want. We want the project, we want the code requirements met. And Patrick DiOrio has been working with his staff to make sure that comes to completion. But, we want to be, straightforward, keep people informed on what we're doing with the city. And again, we're going to make sure the requirements are met. Those are non-negotiable. And as far as the completion of the project, we're excited about it. We want to see it happen.
Okay.
Sooner rather than later.
Okay. David Held, Mayor of North Canton, asking some really difficult questions, I think.
You're the one that asks difficult questions, Marty.
And
that camera, you get that camera going and kind of forces answers. So,
okay,
but that's
well,
okay.
But you've always, contrary to my experience with a lot of public officials, you've always handled it with grace and maturity. So thank you
Thanks.
for appearing on the Stark County Political Report.
Okay, thank you.